Hello, and welcome to the second in a series of programs here on WCTV. I'm Donna Geddes, and I hope you will enjoy these programs presented by the Richmond Historic Preservation Commission with the help from our friends at Preserve Richmond Inc. and WCTV. Tonight we feature several of Richmond's historic treasures, 4 historic buildings that have stood the test of time since the turn of the 20th century. These structures were part of Richmond's everyday life and stand today as a reminder of our rich historic heritage. They include the Pennsylvania Railroad Depot, the Bundy Studio, 10th Street Friends Meeting House, and the Reid Memorial Presbyterian Church. Please join us and our friends at Preserve Richmond Inc. for a tour of Richmond's historic treasures.
The Pennsylvania Railroad Depot in Richmond, Indiana, is a magnificent structure. Located at 2 Northeast Street, near the intersection of North E and Fort Wayne Avenue, the depot has a storied history and a questionable future. The Pennsylvania Railroad Depot is the centerpiece of Richmond's Railroad Historic District and has been referred to as the Hoosier Bowery. The district encompasses 4 city blocks of industrial and commercial buildings, most of which were built between 1875 and 1910. Soon after Richmond was settled in 1806, Jeremiah Cox purchased land around what is now Northeast Street and Fort Wayne Avenue. Cox sold the land to Charles Starr and his wife Elizabeth in 1826, and they developed it. Fort Wayne Avenue, formerly known as Quaker Trace, became a gateway for trade to Fort Wayne and helped establish commerce between Richmond and Cincinnati. It was also used by the Underground Railroad. The roads were important because before the arrival of the railroad, most goods were moved by wagons. Eventually, the southwestern headquarters of the Pennsylvania Railroad were located in Richmond, making the city an important rail center. Commercial and industrial enterprises clustered in the area. Some, such as Gar Scott and Company, which manufactured threshers and steam engines, sold their products around the world. Access to rail transportation was critical. The current depot is the 3rd built in the general area of North E and Fort Wayne on land donated by Charles and Elizabeth Starr. The first depot, a passenger station about 20 feet wide and 75 feet long, opened March 18, 1853, as the railroads pushed west. Passenger and freight traffic grew and railroads prospered, and the original depot was replaced by a new Union Station in 1872. The city of Richmond contributed $30,000 to building the new depot, half the total cost of the structure. At 85.5 feet by 250 feet, the new depot, built in the Second Empire style, was big enough for trains to pass through. Passenger and freight traffic continued to grow, and in 1899, the Pennsylvania Railroad recommended that Union Station be remodeled and modernized. The city and the railroad met frequently to discuss remodeling plans, but in 1901, the railroad announced that it would cost more to remodel Union Station than it would to replace it. Noted Chicago architect Daniel Hudson Burnham, who designed the famous Flatiron Building in New York City, Marshall Field's department store in Chicago, and public buildings such as city halls and railroad stations across the country, was asked to design a new depot. The contract for construction went to the E.W. Sproul Construction Company. Work on the depot began in December of 1901, and the station began operation on July 7th, 1902. The new station cost $200,000. At its height, more than 25 passenger trains a day passed through the station, and the building housed a restaurant, a shoe shine stand, a newsstand, a barber shop, and railroad offices. Those who passed through the station over the years included Presidents Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and Dwight Eisenhower. Jazz musicians headed for recording sessions at the Star Studio, and countless families sending soldiers off to World Wars I and II. Anyone from Richmond who ever sat in the parking lot of the small railroad station in Connorsville at 2 a.m. waiting for a train to Chicago must miss the days when the Pennsylvania Railroad Station was a busy, bustling place. The Penn Central, which succeeded the Pennsylvania Railroad, vacated the station in 1972 as railroad traffic decreased and automobile traffic grew. The Norfolk and Western bought the station and several miles of track in 1981 and said it planned to tear down the station. The city of Richmond stepped in and bought the station for $30,000 and conveyed it to the Urban Enterprise Association in 1988 for $1. The Depot, a prospectus for adaptive use published by the Urban Enterprise Association, describes some of the building's outstanding features. The Richmond Railroad Historic District is listed in the National Register of Historic Places. The Railroad District adjoins the Star Historic District, which is also listed in the National Register of Historic Places. The depot site is 0.968 of an acre. The building, which has approximately 6,816 square feet on each of 2 floors, with an attic, a partial basement, and a separate 1,440 square foot baggage and freight building. There are 50 off-street parking places and a number of on-street places. The prospectus also says that significant resources are available for developers and business tenants. Despite the best efforts of the Urban Enterprise Association, years passed and no buyer was found. Meanwhile, the depot appeared on Historic Landmarks of Indiana's list of 10 most endangered sites twice, once in 1996 and again in 2005. The future of the depot looked brighter when the Palladium Item ran an article on October 26, 2005 entitled "Depot Salvage for $1" and told how owners of an antique and architectural salvage business in Indianapolis bought the building and planned to make another architectural salvage and antique business. However, work is at a standstill and the structure continues to deteriorate. The city is currently working with the owner to get the building restored and occupied. What the Indiana Preservationist calls one of Indiana's best unaltered examples of Burnham's work deserves the support and attention of the people of Richmond and Wayne County. In addition to being an architectural treasure and an irreplaceable part of our history, there are important economic reasons to ensure the future of the depot. Coincidentally, Union Station in Washington, D.C. was also designed by Daniel Burnham and opened in 1908. Today, it is one of Washington's best-known places, with 32 million people a year visiting the shops and restaurants and the trains that still stop there. Visitors and local residents alike in Washington and in Richmond appreciate restaurants and shops that are unique and special, places they could not find anywhere else. A renovated depot would bring jobs, visitors, local traffic, and income to what is one of the most interesting parts of Richmond, the Richmond Railroad Historic District. And when employers such as hospitals, colleges, and manufacturers recruit employees, those employees are looking for a community that provides not just services and schools, but also offers art and culture, including a sense of history. A cornerstone of that history is the Pennsylvania Railroad Station, the beloved depot.
Born in Guilford County, North Carolina, John Bundy's family moved to a farm near Monrovia, Indiana in 1893. As a young man attending a Quaker school, he was encouraged in art by celebrated Hoosier poet James Whitcomb Riley, who had become aware of his drawings. Riley gave Bundy a number of art books to study the work of well-known painters. Bundy's early work was that of portraiture, a more lucrative form of art. In 1888, Bundy became the head of the Earlham College Art Department. For 8 years, he taught drawing and painting before leaving to pursue painting full-time. He would become Richmond's premier artist and dean of the Richmond Group. His dealer, J.W. Young of Chicago, held regular exhibitions of his work. He would exhibit his works at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, the National Academy of Design, and the National Arts Club in New York. In 1910, he showed in the biennial exhibition at the Cochran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. He would also show on an annual basis in Indiana, including the Richmond's annual exhibition. Bundy was one of the founders of the Art Association of Richmond. He was in attendance at the first organizational meeting and served on the board of directors for many years. The Art Association purchased his 5-foot-long painting, Blue Spring, in 1900. This was only the second work the Art Association had acquired, the first being an important work by T.C. Steele, reflecting the importance of Bundy as an Indiana artist. Throughout his career, Bundy was devoted to the woodland interior. He has immortalized the beech woods of his home state. Bundy noted, "I was first attracted to the beech because it is so numerous here in Indiana. I think the beech right here in Wayne County is the finest I have seen anywhere. I like the woodland, and of course I could not paint a woodland without painting the beech." Although many of his paintings seem to be of autumn, he did paint all seasons, including a large number of winter scenes that are on permanent view at the Richmond Art Museum. Much of the fine quality of art in Richmond can be attributed to the influence of John Bundy. As a teacher, painter, mentor, and art patron, he has given much to his beloved community. He left 16 paintings to the Richmond Community School System as an inspiration to young children. His love of nature and of the surrounding community is evident in all of his work. Ella Bond Johnston, former director of the Art Association of Richmond, wrote in her tribute to Bundy, "Of these landscape painter historians, no one sees beauty in nature more poetically or expresses it with a vision and technique more uninfluenced by the ideas or conventions of other painters than does John Elwood Bundy. He sings naturally in the language of color, the beauty of the Hoosier landscape. Just as James Whitcomb Riley gives us in words the charm of his Hoosier neighbors and friends, his paintings have been great teachers, opening the eyes of the unseen to find beauty in nature as he sees it, and to appreciate and enjoy the expression of it on canvas. His work will live to show coming generations the character of the native landscape of the Whitewater Valley of Indiana and the beautiful way one sensitive soul felt about it." John Elwood Bundy's legacy continues by his work being represented in many of our local institutions, including Morrison Reeves Library, Richmond Community Schools, Earlham College, Indiana University East, and local banks and businesses. His studio, located at 527 West Main Street, caught fire in May of 2002. Today, the structure remains intact, but the interior was significantly damaged by the fire. The future of this studio remains uncertain.
Friends, known to some as Quakers, were the earliest settlers of this area. Many left the slave-holding Carolinas to come to the new Indiana Territory, designated as slave-free. The land here was owned by Jeremiah Cox, a name you will recognize as one of the original settlers of Richmond. By 1809, a Friends meeting was organized and met in a 25 by 25 log cabin near what is now North 10th and F. The population was growing rapidly, and soon the cabin was no longer adequate. In the 1820s, a huge, by the standards of the time, brick meeting house was built a bit north and east of the old log meeting house. It was 100 by 60 with 25-foot high walls. Quite a sight on this new frontier. It housed the weekly worship of this group, plus the yearly gathering of all the friends in the area, a number which could reach into the thousands. The railroad came through Richmond in 1853, and with it many industries. Soon this area became bustling, noisy, and not nearly as suitable for friends' gatherings. So a new yearly meeting house was built in 1878 at what is now 16th and Main. We finally come to the origins of this building, which was also built in 1878. Why, you might ask, would a new, smaller meeting house be built here when the group was moving to a new, large meeting house on Main Street? Some feel that it was a sentimental gesture as a remembrance of the origins of the area, to accompany the burial ground here, and to serve those folks who would need to walk to meeting from the immediate neighborhood. Several years ago, I was fortunate to have a visit from Lowell Patty, who attended this meeting as a child. Lowell walked me through the meeting house, explaining what it was like in the early 1900s. In the mid-90s, a group of graduate students from Ball State's School of Architecture documented a number of historic buildings in Richmond, this meeting house among them. Much of what I know about the building comes from their work, and of course, since I'm a Quaker, from my general knowledge of Friends and their worship. In typical Quaker style, the building is quite simple, but it does have a couple of decorative elements. The ornamental brackets and window hoods are Italianate, while the use of corbelled or extended brick above the windows is Romanesque. The new meeting house on Main Street was designed by John Hazacoster. Whether he designed this building is unknown, but that would be a possibility. The entrance is rather impressive with 12-foot tall double doors. These once opened in total, but at some point were modified so only the lower half opens. A gabled roof topped by a metal finial protects the entrance. The other ornamentation on the front of the building is an ocular window high up on the gable outlined by corbelled brick. Both the north and south sides of the building consist of 3 bays with windows in each bay, and again the ocular windows in smaller gables which break up the roof line. The rear of the building has been modified by us to accommodate its use as a storage facility, but it does have one noteworthy feature. You can still see the outline of a roof line of what was once a shelter for horses and carriages. This building housed North 10th Street meeting until the 60s. By then, the membership had dwindled to a handful, and so the meeting was laid down in 1969. In the next few years, the building was used as an office of economic opportunity, a community gathering place called the Black Palace, and as an alcohol rehab center. The building stood vacant and open for a period before we purchased it in 1974. The interior had been gutted and it was in quite deteriorated state when we received it. You could see the sky through the roof, so one thing we were able to do was add a new metal roof and gutters. The original roof was wood shakes, but the Ball State group thought the metal roof was a good choice and did not detract from the historical significance of the building. There are 2 large open floors. The lower level was used for Sunday school classes, beginning to be popular about that time. The upper floor was used for meeting for worship. Probably the most interesting feature of the interior to me is the open 2-story foyer with a double staircase leading to the upper floor. Perhaps this double staircase reflects early Friends' practice of seating men and women on opposite sides of the room. My husband David and I considered having the meeting house a trust. Although conditions have not allowed restoring the building to its original state, I do take heart in the Ball State students' conclusion. Without the adaptation of the meeting house to a warehouse, it probably wouldn't even be standing.
This segment will be focusing on the Reid Memorial United Presbyterian Church in Richmond, Indiana. Reid Memorial Presbyterian Church is a fantastic landmark that is truly a monumental example of architecture in the city and is another example of the great architecture in Richmond, Indiana. But of course, the building would never have happened without one Daniel Gray Reid. Daniel Reid lived between 1858 and 1925. He was born here in Richmond, Indiana, and he began as a clerk in the Second National Bank of Richmond and was vice president of that bank by 1895. Daniel Reid wanted to make sure that he left a memory to his parents, something that would be long-standing and something that would be remembered for a long time. And many of these memorials happened during a time in forms of architecture, the great architecture of the day. So in 1902, Reid began to make the plans for what would become his most generous project to Richmond. 2 projects, indeed, both of them including the Reid Memorial United Presbyterian Church and the Reid Memorial Hospital, both of which were dedicated in 1905. Reid was a very powerful man, as we've laid out. He worked on raising his wealth so he could afford to make such donations and such generous projects to the community. And so because of that power, he was able to work with people like Louis Comfort Tiffany. When he began the plans to build the Reid Memorial United Presbyterian Church, he formed a committee that would work on designing and constructing this church. To help lead that effort, the committee hired Louis Comfort Tiffany to help design everything from the windows down to the mosaics of this church. Now, Louis Comfort Tiffany is well known in his own right as an artist and designer for many, many decorative arts. He lived between February of 1848 and January of 1933. He was an American artist and designer who worked in the decorative arts and is best known for his work in stained glass. He is the American artist most associated with Art Nouveau and the aesthetics movements. Louis Tiffany worked to design the entire structure at the Reid Presbyterian Church there in Richmond, Indiana, at the corner of 11th and North A Streets. The architects of the church were Badgley and Nicholas of Cleveland, Ohio. Construction of the church began in 1904 and was completed in 1906. The architecture of the structure is medieval English architecture, or a modification of the English Gothic cathedral on the exterior. On the interior, the Bundy Studio has many links to the arts and crafts movement. That can be seen through a lot of the wood decoration throughout the structure. Much of that wood is mahogany, and that is very impressive when you think about how mahogany would have been transported from South America to Richmond, Indiana. Not only is the wood and the mosaics so impressive in the structure, but the windows are probably the most identifiable part to the structure. There are over 62 windows with rare backlit design with these windows, all of them being designed by the Tiffany New York studio. The bells, the musical bell chimes, which were installed at a cost of $15,000, and those were $15,000 in 1906 dollars. Very, very impressive structure with those included in it. There is also a Hook and Hastings organ that cost over $20,000 that was brought in from Boston, Massachusetts. One of the most impressive parts, however, to the church are those windows indeed. And specifically, one of the most impressive of those windows is the Eastern Morn window by Tiffany Studios, which was ordered in 1908 and dedicated in 1909. And it was this window that was dedicated to William S. Reid and Andrew Finley Scott. Inside the church, there is also a grand piano that was made from the Star Piano Company, located here in Richmond, Indiana. And it is because of these reasons, the affiliation with Daniel Gray Reid, Louis Comfort Tiffany, the bells, the mosaics, the tiles, the mahogany wood, the windows, the piano, it's because of these that we have to work to make sure that this structure is preserved and maintained for posterity and for future generations. Daniel Reid dedicated this structure to the memory of his parents, and he wanted to make sure that that would be there for the lifetime of the structure and for the community of Richmond to enjoy. Currently, the Presbyterian Church has experienced, like many churches today, a decrease in attendance and the congregation has considered various options about continuing the use of the religious purposes there at the church. And yet, they have strong partners here in Richmond. Just last year in 2008, a partnership between Historic Landmarks Foundation of Indiana, Preserve Richmond, the Richmond Art Museum, the Wayne County Historical Museum, worked together to complete and put on a symposium of the church's past and the significance of the Tiffany windows. This symposium that took place in the middle of February on the snowiest day of the year was viewed by a packed audience in the Reid Church. Over 200 people showed up to listen, to learn about the importance of this structure and the significance of having such artwork and design here in Richmond, Indiana. This outpouring of support shows and proves that the community cares for this building and hopes to see it continue to be used in some way to service the community, and has helped to inspire the combination of those groups, those supporting partners, to continue the effort to preserve this building by working with the Presbytery to look at possibly transferring the structure from the ownership of them to a collaborative group led by the Wayne County Historical Museum to operate the structure as a community resource for Richmond, Indiana, and a museum and a showpiece for Tiffany glass and art. The future of the building is yet to be decided and found, and yet the collaborative group is also working with Historic Landmarks to place an easement on the structure, working with the Presbytery to do that, and that preservation easement will help to solidify the feelings that this building will be preserved for future generations to enjoy the work of Tiffany and Reid.
I hope you have enjoyed this tour of some of Richmond's historic treasures. These buildings stand as a reminder of where we have come from as a community. They also speak to us about our future and the place they hold in our city today. If you would like to receive more information on any of these buildings or even help with their preservation, please contact us at the Richmond Historic Preservation Commission or Preserve Richmond, Inc. Don't miss our next program here on WCTV featuring the centennial celebration of the Murray Theater, home to Richmond Civic Theater on 10th and Main Street. The program will also feature the building's original owner, Mr. Omar G. Murray, a man of many talents in the entertainment business at a time when Richmond enjoyed one of its most prosperous periods in the early 20th century. Till next time, this is Donna Geddes.